I'm starting.
I'm trying to vid. Just gonna put it here.
All right, there we go.
All right, let's just get straight into it because 10 o'clock. Yeah. So, yeah.
All right. Great.
All right. Can I start first with my? I'm just gonna jump in with my level 1 question.
Go for it.
Right, straight up. So, what evidence does the author use to support the idea that the use of soma takes a necessary part of humanity in dealing with unpleasant feelings away?
All right. So that I think it's just mentioned all over the place, like especially with Lenina in the beginning, or not even in the beginning, but just like whenever, let's say they were at the civilization and she sees something like a mother, or she sees something like a savage, as they say repeatedly, and she's like, oh, I can't handle this, I need soma. And Bernard, who is more against soma, even at times is like he confides in the soma, and he himself takes it as well. It's something that Aldous Huxley likes to point out, and it's, it can make, there's parallels that can be drawn from that and marijuana, but that's something we can get into later on in the conversation.
Yeah. So one of the scenes that I thought was really well representative of this was when John, or like they call him the Savage, when he tried to get the 2 Delta minuses, or like the workers, to not take the soma, and I believe that was in chapter 15, or toward the end of chapter 15 where he did that. And I feel like one of the things that he said was that he related soma to like anti-freedom. Really, like he was saying like choose your freedom instead of soma, and he called soma like a poison. And I think it really just goes to show like kind of how important the values of individuality and autonomy are to him, and how he operates as a person. And it really goes to show like the differences in culture between our culture and their culture, which, in the end are almost kind of like opposites, but we can get into that later. But like one of the things you also were saying is that like the use of like the word savage and like how they call him savage, that leads in to my next question. And it is like, how does the use of the various times that John has been called a savage really like exemplify cultural differences and the differences in values between our society and their society, and like what events that have taken place in the book really like kind of have contributed to that, and are they like a good thing, a bad thing? Like what are your thoughts on?
Yeah, I thought that was, I don't know. Every time I read it's something that kind of sparked just some interest with me, just because I've always, thought of the fact that, how Americans entered the United States. I mean, not obviously Americans yet, but Europeans. And those people immediately saw these native people and decided to call them Indians, because they decided that was, they were in India and they were going to refer to these people as that. They were just referring to people as something. And I think that's something kind of Aldous Huxley was pointing out, was the fact that we are not really able to accept people that are different from us. And that's why we refer to them as savage and names like that. And I think another place where that's really pointed out is the movie that John and Lenina watch. And within that movie, it was like this, Negro person who they referred to as Negro over and over again, who was kind of the bad guy. And it just kind of points out this societal racism that was kind of evident throughout the whole book. Kind of, they talked about the lower caste people as being people with darker skin. And again, it's just seems like a repetitive cycle that he points out, is just bits and pieces of racism that go along with this caste system.
Yeah, like I think that the idea like of referring to him as a savage almost kind of like it shows how, as society has become more reliant on soma and has become more like, well, not more, they've become like less inclined to kind of like to learn new things and to kind of like use the scientific method. Like that's one of the things that was talked about with John, and then the head. What was the head guy's name again? When he was
Mustafa Mond.
yeah, that Mod. When he was talking with Mod, they were talking. They were having like a philosophical discussion about how like the seeking of knowledge could be detrimental to the order of society, and that's like it's almost like a theme, but that's like a value that this society really like takes into heart. That is kind of that's like pretty much the opposite to kind of our society today. Um, and I think that like one of the representations of that ideology kind of shining through is people just referring to John as a savage, and it's like drastically simplifying the complexities of his character because they don't understand it, but at the same time they don't understand it because they are not driven in any way to try and understand it because of the way that they've been raised. And that's like there are other examples too, like the way that like lower castes have been like the alcohol used in like the bottles to help with like the lower caste so that they can't develop to their full mental capacity and their mental like their potential to be like maximally competent. And I think that that is yet another example of how like this society has really valued order and like I guess safety, I kind of to a degree, because it's like it's a result of that war that happened like a while ago, and like their history and stuff. And I think it just goes to show how like they value safety over over like freedom of thought and autonomy. um, and I think I don't know. Do you think that that is like a worthwhile philosophy to like have? Like, because I think in some extents it is applicable in our society today. Like, I know that in times of war, the government has been known to take more of a central role in people's lives, just through like different like off the top of my head like the Alien and Sedition Acts. Even though like they were kind of racist, they were like trying to keep people safe. And I think that this is that it's like this world is kind of that idea driven to an extreme to the point where it is detrimental to the success and the well-being of the people that are living there.
Yeah. I thought that was actually a huge point that you brought up is the fact that they're not able to accept people that are different. And you brought up the alcohol surrogate. And I think that's a part that was mentioned throughout the whole book is the fact that Bernard had a little bit of alcohol surrogate mixed in his bottle as a kid. And so because of that, he was, different and all these things, and people weren't able to accept him. And that was kind of a sad reality that for Bernard, it kind of alienated him as a human being. When you bring up the idea that this conformity is necessary for stability, I think it's kind of a sad reality. But I mean, it's evident today in society at the fact that we're given so many freedoms and so much free thought through, technology that there is quite a bit of unstableness. I don't know. This is not a great
Yeah.
word, but like, with politics, there's the one side, there's the left, there's the right fighting against one another. We had a president from 2016 to 2020 that a lot of people disagreed with and a lot of people agreed with. But to me, the overarching idea that I would relate to this book itself is the fact that communism has never worked and it will never work. And as much as Aldous Huxley makes a good point that, here, let's look at page 260. You don't have to look at it. I'll read it to you. But basically, he points out the fact that there was one person who had a PhD in sociology, and then he gets into it a little bit more. Alas, higher education is not necessarily a guarantee of higher virtue or higher political wisdom. And to these misgivings on ethical and psychological grounds must be added misgivings of purely scientific character. I thought that was really big at the fact that, even with all this scientific knowledge, people are not able to be happy. I mean, sure, it's a good point, and arguably that with technology and with, I think a thing I would like to relate to Soma is legalized marijuana. Is people don't really have to think anymore, so they just have this fake kind of sense of happiness, and they're fine with that, and they've accepted that, and maybe that's all right. But we have lost our desire for information, and that is kind of a sad reality that a lot of people have lost. Do I think it's inevitable for everyone to lose that? No, I don't personally think that. I think the way we're thinking is just going to change, but a good amount of people are really willing to just numb their pain, which again brings that theme of oppression and conformity.
Yeah, and there was one thing that you brought up that I kind of like to add a complexity to almost, or a little bit of a nuance there, is just the idea that technology has allowed us to become more autonomous. And I think that there is something to be said about the way that information is presented to us now, because I know for a fact that the various ways that social media can present information to us goes along with politically the information is politically aligned with our values, that they pick up through an algorithm based on the content that we consume. And I would venture to say that that is not necessarily um, like freedom or like like freedom of thought, because it kind of encapsulates us in a one-dimensional way of thinking about a certain situation, and fails to kind of acknowledge the nuance or the other side of it. Because I mean, in pretty much all things, especially politics, there are so many different perspectives to be considered. And I think that that is one of the detriments with technology and with our thought process being converted to more fast speed, like consuming information and not really going deep into thinking. There is just our ability to not acknowledge multiple sides of an argument that have been made. And the other thing too, with recreational drugs, like one thing that I like to bring up is the idea that like you brought up the idea of like weed giving people happiness, and you were relating that to Soma in a way that it kind of like creates artificial happiness, which is true in a way. But the thing is that not all drugs can do that. Like I know in the Atlantic, that article that we read, it was mentioned there was a I forget what the drug was called, but the author was talking about how that drug was like allowed people to stay up multiple
Oh
nights,
yeah.
and like really refined thought, and just be able to think at a higher level. And I know like other drugs, like Adderall or amphetamines, like even though like they're illegal and they're prescribed medication, they do have like psychological benefits in terms of like focus span, and just like, and obviously if you have more like focus span, you can probably think a little bit more deeply into certain topics, and just like that, and just really kind of go into that whole idea of like mental, like I guess like being upgraded,
Hmm.
like having an upgraded mental state. But yeah, I don't know. It's really, yeah, I guess when it come down to it, there's with like the rise of technology and different like in different the different ways that technology has impacted our life, like whether or not it's the internet or different kinds of medications, like there are going to be benefits and there are going to be detriments and drawbacks. So there's really like no way you can get around that.
Yeah, exactly. That's funny, actually, you brought up that drug because I have texts actually where I asked my mom if she could get me some of that
Oh,
stuff.
of course,
Yeah,
yeah.
I
Why
mean,
why not?
we all want to be ahead of everyone else. That's just how it is. Because whenever you get that little boost, then who knows where you could go? You can go crazy places with it, and that's why, I mean, there's not a whole lot of people who just don't like refrain from, technology use, because it's there, and why would we not use it? I mean, it makes everything so easy. And this is the reason why I've been at a crossroads throughout this semester, is just because we talked about the fact that Socrates was unable to accept the book, and we also talk about the fact that the internet is so dangerous. But what makes this internet and this new technology any different of an advancement than the book? I mean, from one point before the book, we were all like searching for information, testing things. But then after the book, then we already had the information. We were just able to read it. And now, instead of, reading it, we're able to watch videos. And I think things are just digressing. Like, I mean, not necessarily digressing, but they're advancing to the point where we are able to find more information. But to me, that, like, where does that end? We'll be at a point where we won't even need to move, and we'll just be able to get information and get thoughts. And that is dangerous. And I think that's kind of where it's so hard to separate the line between advancement and danger. And what are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that actually is a really good segue into my next like question. But I mean, I'll comment on that like on your question as well. But mine is like, what is too much control within a society? And because this society, even it's like it's portrayed in the book as like a utopia, but it's kind of hinted to be dystopian just in the way that John sees the world, because of the fact that people are basically like, he sees the world as people being a slave to Soma, and happiness not really being like true and genuine, and it just being more of a like the role that Soma is playing is to more like quench thirst, or like I think he said to like feed like a hunger or something. But it's just like, it's not really a means to true happiness. It's more of a mean to like satisfy like happiness not being there. And I guess even though it's like an extreme, I guess like the line of government, or like the line of autonomy versus order and safety. I feel like when like this is kind of a hard question to answer, but like I feel like a general line, it's kind of hard because it's not necessarily like a line, it's more of like a range of like different things. But I'd say like when when you don't have the ability to make your own decisions, and they can like impact, if you have a decision that you want to make and it impacts you negatively, and it impacts you, the ones that are around you, negatively, but but it's like a decision that you want to make, I feel like, or that you don't want to make, but like you're forced to make, I feel like that's almost like taking it too far. Because like with Russia and communism that you brought up earlier, like the people that were there, like they were all treated equally, but with the absence of competition, it led to people's like their undoing, just because like everyone got a lower than desirable like outcome. Whereas I think that if you want to make a decision to better yourself, even if it is the detriment of other people, I think that there needs to be like a distribution of free will, and like safety. And the other thing you have to consider too is like times of like war. Like I brought up earlier, like when during times of war and times of crisis, the government tends to take more of a central role, and I think that is okay, just because it's like the safety of people, but it's like when they're in a dangerous situation. But I think that if they're in a situation that does not mandate like government control over people, then it shouldn't. Then they should be more like free in terms of like your ability to make decisions.
And I think that's what's so fascinating about this society is, sure, it's communistic, but at the same time, it's like people aren't even given that ability to get sick of society because they're taking so much and they're doing all these things to the point where they don't really have any emotions. And it's kind of scary because, I mean, who knows, with all the stuff we're given, that's where we could go. I don't really think I see a communistic society necessarily, but I see a society of just the numbing of emotions and pain and through technology. Um, but again, I think that the most important thing I think that he brings up, to me, the most important character in this book has to be Bernard. And that starts at the beginning because it's evident that Bernard is unhappy with society, which is already, unheard of as it is. And so because he's unhappy and, people don't respect him because they think he has alcohol surrogate, you look at him like he's some sort of like a saint in this book, and he's like, gonna lead the charge towards, something bigger. But then as soon as he hears that some little weakness of the director, he doesn't take it as, oh wow, this guy's having had issues too. He takes it more as, this is my way in. And that to me is like, it's huge because that just contradicts everything you thought about this guy. And then he uses this whole John story, John being the director's son, as a way against him. And I think that represents like the something about that represents like this kind of conformity. Even he is not able to truly be different, because if he finds any way to get in, he'll do it. And that kind of represents like a human desire to fit in and a human desire for everything to be okay. And obviously that doesn't work out so well for Bernard, because no one shows up for his meeting, and that's obviously not it didn't work out for him. And it's just, to me, that idea that he has is really important. But also in the beginning of the book, one of the questions I had was like, how does the juxtaposing of Bernard Marx and Lenina Crown further exemplify the conditioned society?
What does juxtaposing mean?
It's basically two characters like being compared. So like a good example would be, they were in the helicopter, right? It was a helicopter.
Yeah.
And John was so fascinated by the sea, and he was looking out, he thought it was beautiful. But Lenina, on the other hand, was, so conditioned that she was, I mean, not John, I mean, Bernard was so fascinated by the sea. And then Lenina herself, she was, she was like freaking out and thought it was something terrible.
Yeah. So, can you just repeat the question?
How does like the juxtaposing of Bernard Marx and Lenina Crown further exemplify the conditioned society?
Yeah, well, I feel like it shows. This is yet another example of like how it's like kind of showing cultural differences between our world and then this dystopia, because Bernard is kind of a representative of what our normal cultural values are, and that's evident in the fact that he doesn't take soma. But then the fact that Lenina does, it kind of shows how like their conditioned values are just different in they're just different than our own, but yet it's kind of like an artificial value system, if you will, just because of the fact that there were like the various conditioning things such as like the hypnophilia, and then like with the babies they did like the flowers and like the shock therapy and stuff to try and condition them. And it just goes to show like all those scenes show like the not necessarily the cause, but like the action that goes into creating the result of this like unhuman like ideology, really. And it just goes to show like the extent to which you have to go to in order to kind of take away some natural human desires and enjoyment. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I think another part, like you were bringing up the fact that it's this society is constantly compared with our society. And I think the biggest thing that stood out for me was how whenever Linda was dying, John was showing that he was upset and crying, and the the lady who was there, who was in
Oh
charge.
God.
Okay. Well, all right, we'll still got most of it on here. So, but
Okay.
um, for the most part, uh, he was like crying, and she was unable to accept it. And in fact, she was more worried that these kids who were supposed to learn from this, hospital, were all of a sudden gonna, it was gonna taint their minds because he was crying because his mom died, and the fact that he even had a mom, and the fact that you're showing any emotion, it was like it was mind blowing for this lady, and I was like, it was kind of sad for John because John didn't mean anything, any harm by it. He was just being normal, and the society didn't allow for that. It's like,
Yeah, it kind of shows the extent, especially with the ending with John. It really, I feel like it shows the extent of how, like, alienation and just being excluded from society and your peers, and no matter, like, what type of society it is, it can really affect you mentally and really be a detriment to your mental health because, in the end, John pretty much goes crazy. I feel like it's fair to say. But that's kind of just because of all the traumatic events that he experienced, and then the his experience with the society and the world as a whole. Um, but yeah, I feel like that, and it's kind of ironic in a sense because that, like, the need to be social with people is a human necessity, yet they kind of, like, they isolate John from this society for the better of, like, for the better of everyone else as a whole. Whereas, like, maybe had they integrated him and allowed him to make the changes to it, that would have benefited everyone, and maybe had, like, some influences on him, vice versa. Because when you introduce someone like that is so foreign and different into a new, like, environment, they affect each other. It's not just solely like the society affecting John. Like, if there's going to be some trade offs just because of, like, just how drastic the behaviors are, and how they're different. But I just think it's kind of ironic how that was like a human need, but yet the like, to fit into society, yet it kind of came in like a detriment to John's overall mental health and physical health in the end, at the end of it. So I don't know.
that ending really blew my mind. No pun intended there. Uh,
Yeah.
but the fact that he was so strong, and I mean not strong, but just like beating himself, and then all of a sudden just flips and decides it's okay to have an orgy with everyone else. Like, how did we get there? I was like, Aldous, like how did you decide that that was a? And then the fact that he's just hanging, and they use the, well, what do you think the importance of the language at the end, where it's just like, left, east, northeast, east? I was like, what?
What's the page again?
I think it is, let's see, it's hard to find because there's so many
Yeah.
ending, uh, he gives a lot of it was very hard to read. That's all
You
I
know,
know.
it's actually, it's okay because we're nearing, like, the end of the time anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Do you have any final thoughts?
Um, it was nice talking to you, Will. That's
Yeah, I was
the
talking to you too, Ryan. I hope you have a good night.
you too. All right.
All right, cool. Did you get the recording?